shocking revelation. Pregnant with quintuplets, she was betrayed. Years later, a fateful meeting exposes a mind-blowing secret that changes everything. Subscribe, like this video. Comment below where you're watching from. We're here to give you more stories that will blow you away. The golden morning light filtered through the small bathroom window, casting a near-angelic glow around Cecilia. Her fingers trembled as she held the pregnancy test, silent tears streaming down her face. Positive. After 3 years of trying, it had finally happened. She gently touched the tiny window showing the result, a mix of fear and hope surging through her pounding heart. "I will love you forever, my little one," she whispered, her voice choked with raw emotion. For the next few weeks, Cecilia held the secret close, a precious treasure. She'd wake up early each morning to whisper to her still flat belly, telling stories about the world waiting for her child. She meticulously planned the perfect reveal for her husband, Mark. She bought a tiny pair of shoes, hiding them in her sock drawer. She ordered a special cake for the coming weekend. She even started reorganizing the guest room, imagining the colors she'd use to transform it into the nursery of her dreams. But something was off. Small, seemingly insignificant things that together created a disturbing mosaic. Mark taking hushed phone calls, messages quickly hidden when she walked by. He was coming home later and later, with excuses that sounded a little too rehearsed. A last-minute meeting, impossible traffic, a demanding client. Cecilia pushed her doubts aside, focusing on the joy of her pregnancy. Soon, they would be 3, a complete family. The universe couldn't be so cruel as to take this dream away from her now, could it? A relentless downpour arrived on Thursday afternoon, the kind that felt like it was washing the very soul out of the city. Cecilia watched the violent drops lash against the window, mesmerized by the chaotic rhythm. Mark had forgotten his cell phone on the kitchen counter when he rushed out for work. All she wanted was to order some Thai food, her new, still secret pregnancy craving. When she reached for his phone to unlock it, the notification popped up, inescapable. "I can't lie to her anymore. We have to tell her about us." The message was from Sophia, her best friend since college, her maid of honor. Cecilia's fingers slid across the screen as if possessed, revealing months of passionate conversations, secret rendezvous, plans for a future where she didn't exist. The rain beating against the windows seemed to be a perfect echo of the storm raging in her heart. The box with the baby's shoes slipped from her trembling hands, shattering on the floor like her hopes. It couldn't be real. Not Sophia. Not now. Cecilia spent the next few days in an emotional limbo, unable to confront them, unable to admit aloud the devastation she felt. She held on to the one thread of hope she had left, the tiny being growing inside her, and went through with her first prenatal appointment. Alone in the waiting room, she watched smiling couples, their hands intertwined, their shared futures written on their faces. The empty seat beside her had never felt so painfully loud. "Cecilia Mendoza," the nurse called with a gentle smile. Can you imagine the terror she must have felt? The raw, gut-wrenching pain of betrayal compounded by the loneliness of her pregnancy. How would you have handled that moment? Would you have confronted them immediately, or waited like Cecilia? Tell us what you think in the comments. Dr. Louisa had warm eyes that immediately made Cecilia feel a little less alone. The initial conversation flowed normally. Family history, habits, expectations. "Let's see how this little one is doing," the doctor said, applying the cold gel to Cecilia's stomach. A strange silence followed. Dr. Louisa frowned, moving the transducer slowly. "Is something wrong?" Cecilia asked, panic rising in her throat. No, not at all." The doctor adjusted her glasses, leaning closer to the screen. Cecilia, I'm seeing... Wait, let me just confirm. Each second of silence was an eternity. Cecilia could feel the tears welling up, anticipating another loss, another devastation. Quintuplets, the doctor finally murmured. I'm seeing 5 babies, 5 tiny hearts beating. 5? The word escaped as an incredulous gasp. It's extremely rare, especially without fertility treatments, Dr. Louisa explained, still moving the transducer to be sure. But there's no doubt. You are carrying 5 babies, Cecilia. 5 distinct heartbeats filled the room. 5 tiny lives. 5 miracles. Something awakened within Cecilia in that moment. An ancient, primitive strength that transcended her personal pain. The fierce resolve of a mother who would protect her children at any cost. In the weeks that followed, she obsessively researched multiple pregnancies, risks, and necessary care. She reorganized her finances, looked for online support groups. She planned and replanned, as if she could control the uncontrollable. All to postpone the inevitable confrontation. Finally, late one night when Mark came home, she was waiting in the darkened living room, with only a lamp lit. The ultrasound image was in her hands. "We need to talk," she said, with a calmness she didn't feel. Mark looked momentarily alarmed, but quickly adopted the composed expression he used for difficult business negotiations. "What's going on?" "I'm pregnant," she said simply. "With quintuplets." The shock on his face would have been almost comical under different circumstances. "Quintuplets? No, that's not possible." 5 babies, Mark. Here they are. She held out the ultrasound photo. "And I know about you and Sophia." The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the old olive tree in the garden seemed to bend its gnarled branches, as if it, too, felt the weight of the moment. "I didn't plan this," he began, running his hands through his immaculately styled hair. "It just happened. Things don't just happen for 18 months, Mark." He didn't even ask how she knew the exact time. He simply looked away. "And the babies? What are you going to do?" she asked him, instinctively protecting her belly with her hand. 5 babies? He repeated, running his hands over his face. "This is going to ruin everything. Ruin our plans, our life. I can't do this, Cecilia. I'm not ready." Each word hit her like a dagger, each one deeper than the last. She had expected denial, maybe even an attempt at reconciliation. She had not expected this absolute, complete abandonment. What Mark didn't know, what no one knew, was that approximately 8 weeks before she discovered the pregnancy, during a low point in their marriage, when he canceled their anniversary celebration for a business trip, Cecilia had found solace in the arms of an old high school friend, now a pilot. Luke had unexpectedly reappeared in her life at a coffee shop near her office. A single encounter, a single night of vulnerability during years of marriage, a moment she had buried deep in her consciousness, consumed by guilt. Now, with the revelation of Mark's prolonged infidelity, that night took on a new light, and a terrifying doubt was born in her mind. Was it possible that one of the babies? The following weeks were a blur of cold arguments, tense mediations, and negotiations over assets and responsibilities. The luxurious apartment they called home became an emotional minefield. Mark oscillated between absolute coldness and fits of rage over the inconvenient timing of the pregnancy. The day he finally left, taking half the furniture and emptying their joint accounts, leaving only the legal minimum, Cecilia knelt in the middle of the empty room, hugging her still flat belly, and for the first time allowed herself to fully feel the magnitude of her loss and the challenge ahead. The neighbors pretended not to see her loading her things into the old minivan her parents had given her years ago. They pretended not to notice her red eyes or the tremor in her hands. In the rearview mirror, Cecilia watched the luxury condo disappear, the end of one life and the beginning of another. "It's just us now," she whispered to the little beings she carried, as she drove back to the hometown she had sworn she'd never return to. On the radio, a song about new beginnings played softly, as if destiny had provided a soundtrack for her journey of rebirth. The road meandered through mountains, each curve taking her farther from what was and closer to what would be. Her parents had received the news with a mix of shock and concern, but they didn't hesitate to offer their home, their support, the unconditional love they'd always had for her. At night, in her old single bed in her childhood room, Cecilia saw the cracks in the ceiling for the first time. They'd always been there, but she'd never noticed. Just as she had never noticed the fissures in her marriage until it was too late. When her mother brought her a cup of chamomile tea and sat silently beside her, without questions or judgment, just holding her hand with that unconditional love that transcends words, the tears finally came, not from sadness or anger, but from relief, like rain after a long drought, purifying the earth so new seeds could sprout. "We'll make it, my daughter," her mother said, stroking her hair as she had when Cecilia was a child. "The 6 of you will be just fine." Under the starry sky of that small town, lulled by the sound of crickets and familiar warmth, Cecilia finally allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, it was true. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the multiplied life pulsing within. 5 tiny hearts, 5 reasons to keep going, 5 promises of a love that would never abandon her. "We will make it," she whispered, repeating her mother's words, making them a mantra, a promise, a prayer. And for the first time in weeks, she slept without nightmares. Can you imagine carrying a secret like that? The thought that one of her babies might not be her husband's, but her former friend's. What would you do? Confront the past or keep the secret hidden forever? Tell us your thoughts below. Like, share, comment. Cecilia's belly grew disproportionately fast, as if the 5 tiny beings inside were competing for space, eager to announce their existence to the world. And with the growth of her belly came the stares, the whispers, the prying questions from the residents of the small town she had left years ago. Poor thing, abandoned with 5 babies. She must have done something to make her husband leave. How will she manage all alone? The words were rarely spoken directly to her, but Cecilia caught them in the sidelong glances at the supermarket checkout, in the whispers that ceased when she entered the pharmacy, in the awkward silence that fell as she walked through the town square. It was as if she carried not only the quintuplets, but also the invisible weight of others' judgment. Cecilia learned to wear headphones when she went out, creating a protective bubble around herself and the little beings she carried. Inside this bubble, she could pretend the world outside didn't exist, that there were no pitying stares, that no one questioned her choices or her abilities. At home, in the privacy of her room, she spoke to each baby individually, giving them secret names that symbolized what she hoped for their futures: courage, hope, faith, strength, and light. Not for the world, just for her. Names that would serve as protective talismans until she could give them official identities. "You are going to be different," she whispered, stroking specific spots on her belly where she felt distinct movements. "You will grow up knowing you are loved unconditionally, that you are wanted, that you are enough exactly as you are." The town's traditional harvest festival, an event that marked the beginning of autumn and brought families from all over the region together, became a true ordeal. Wearing a floral dress that barely disguised her 6-month bump, Cecilia smiled politely as old schoolmates showed off glistening wedding rings and attentive husbands. Some genuinely kind, asked about her health and offered help. Others, with smiles that didn't reach their eyes, feigned interest while gathering information to fuel the local gossip. It was when the discomfort reached its peak that Grandma Teresa, her maternal grandmother, and a respected matriarchal figure in the community, surprised everyone by leaving her post at the food stall to walk over to her. With the elegance of her 82 years and the determination of someone who had survived much harder times, Grandma Teresa took her arm and led her through the festival with her head held high. "This is my granddaughter," she proudly introduced to everyone, "who will give birth to 5 miracles at once." The elderly woman's natural authority silenced even the biggest gossips, transforming looks of judgment into expressions of reluctant respect. That night, sitting on the porch under the starry sky, lulled by the sound of crickets and the scent of night-blooming jasmine, her grandmother shared stories of the women in their family who had faced unthinkable adversity and survived. Her great-great-grandmother Antonia gave birth to twins during the Great Drought of 1950 all alone in a cabin while her husband searched for water miles away, Grandma Teresa said, her gnarled fingers working deftly on embroidery for the baby's layette. Her great-grandmother Laura raised 6 children after she was widowed at 25, without ever accepting charity, only work. Her great-aunt Celeste faced advanced cancer while raising her orphaned nephews, and she's still here today, as strong as an oak. Cecilia listened, mesmerized, discovering in herself traits of those women she had never known, but whose blood and determination pulsed in her veins. "You are not the first to face storms, my daughter," her grandmother concluded, placing her wrinkled hand on Cecilia's. "And you have more strength than you know. It's time to remember who you are and where you came from." Those words were the balm Cecilia needed, a reminder that the fragility of the present did not define her ability to face the future. At 32 weeks of gestation, premature contractions rushed her to the regional hospital. An hour away from the small town, her mother's face, pale with worry in the passenger seat, while her father sped down the winding road, seemed to reflect the very fear that Cecilia refused to admit. "We need to keep them in as long as possible," Dr. Louisa, the same doctor who had confirmed the multiple pregnancy, explained, now with a serious look in her eyes. "Every day counts. Every hour is precious for the baby's lung development." For 10 days, Cecilia lay at an inclined angle, with monitors strapped to her belly, picking up the beats of 5 tiny hearts. The hospital room became her universe. The white walls and the ceiling with water stains became her sky. The sounds of the medical equipment, her background music. During those endless nights, she met other women in the shared room. There was Renata, a 22-year-old fighting a rare cancer during her pregnancy. Fatima, a Syrian refugee who had crossed oceans to give birth in uncertainty, far from the war that had consumed her entire family. Their stories wove a tapestry of female resilience that strengthened Cecilia, reminding her that she was not alone in her struggle. That women all over the world faced seemingly insurmountable mountains every day. "You have an army inside you," Fatima said one night, her accented voice making the words even more poetic. "5 little soldiers fighting at your side. It's not you against the world. It's 6 warriors." At 33 weeks, when it was no longer possible to hold back the birth, the operating room transformed into a theater of tension and miracle. The medical team, double-staffed to attend to the quintuplets, moved in a precise choreography, while Cecilia, with an epidural, remained conscious, feeling pressure and pulling, but no pain. "Fight," she whispered to each little being that came into the world, between the alarms of monitors and the urgent orders of the medical team. "Be strong like our lineage." 5 cries, 5 battles for life, 5 preliminary victories, so small, so fragile, and yet so determined to survive. Clara was the first, 2.6 pounds of determination, with a surprisingly strong cry for her diminutive size. Then came the boys, Miguel and Theo, practically identical, each weighing just over 2 pounds. The fourth was Aurora, the smallest of all, at only 2.1 pounds, but with vigorous reflexes that surprised even the most experienced doctors. The last, Raphael, was the one who stayed longest in the neonatal ICU, the most fragile, with respiratory difficulties that required constant support. During the early morning hours, when the hospital fell silent, and only the medical equipment broke the quiet with its rhythmic beeps, Cecilia would sing to him through the walls of the incubator, feeling that this little warrior, more than any of the others, carried the same stubborn determination that defined her own soul. "I'll wait for you for as long as it takes," she promised, watching him rise and fall, almost imperceptibly, with his tiny chest. There's no rush. Growing strong is more important than growing fast. Despite the initial pessimistic prognoses, Raphael demonstrated the same resilience that characterized the family. After 45 days of hospitalization, while his siblings had been home for almost a month, he was finally discharged. Still small, still requiring special care, but ready to join the rest of the family. Cecilia finally took the last baby home. It was a temporary, cramped house in the back of her parents' property, but decorated with all the love she could muster. The cribs, donated by a local church, were lined up side by side in the only bedroom. Handmade mobiles, crafted by her grandmother Teresa, hung from the ceiling, dancing with the breeze that entered through the window. On the walls, watercolors painted by her mother depicted serene landscapes and smiling animals. The routine was brutal. Feedings every 2 hours, endless diapers, sleepless nights. When one baby finally fell asleep, another would wake up hungry or uncomfortable. The moments of absolute silence, when they were all sleeping at the same time, were as rare as they were precious. Almost sacred instants when Cecilia could breathe Mama Thiert cry and renew her strength for the next round. The neighbors took turns bringing meals, and even people who had once whispered behind her back now showed up offering help. Elderly ladies taught her old tricks for calming colic. Teenagers offered to hold babies while Cecilia took a shower. Rough men, of few words, appeared with refurbished cribs or small, handcrafted wooden toys. A network of female solidarity formed spontaneously. Grandmothers, aunts, cousins, friends Cecilia hadn't seen in years. An old saying goes, "It takes a village to raise a child." To raise 5, she discovered, it took an army of generous hearts. "This isn't charity," explained Mrs. Alzira, an 80-year-old neighbor who showed up every morning to help with the first round of bottles. "It's an investment in the future. These 5 little ones are the future of our community." When the babies were 6 months old, and Cecilia had finally found a rhythm that, although exhausting, was manageable, she received a summons for the first child support hearing. Mark, through his expensive lawyers, questioned everything from paternity to her mental capacity to raise the children. On the courthouse steps, she almost collapsed when she saw her ex-husband holding hands with Sophia, both in expensive clothes, ignoring her as if she were invisible. The sight of them together, prosperous and seemingly happy, while she fought for survival every day, awakened a rage she had never fully allowed herself to feel. A sudden rain drenched her as she waited for the bus home, trembling not only from the cold, but from an indignation that burned inside. That's when she noticed a familiar car pulling up beside her. Her father, his face marked by time and hard work, opened the passenger door. "You're not alone in this fight, daughter," he said simply. On the way back, they remained in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, full of mutual understanding. Her father, a man of few words and many actions, had missed work for the first time in 15 years to be there for her in that difficult moment. When she arrived home, Cecilia was greeted by a scene that immediately washed away all the bitterness of the courthouse encounter. Her 5 little miracles, now sitting up with the support of pillows, smiled and waved their arms at the sight of her. Aurora, always the most expressive, made a sound that resembled a laugh, which was contagious to her siblings. In that crystalline moment of pure joy, Cecilia knew that no court case, no ex-husband, no ex-friend could take away what truly mattered. The baby's christening, when they turned 10 months old, became the most attended event in town. The centuries-old church filled up not out of social formality, but out of genuine celebration for those 5 lives who had won the community's affection. During the ceremony, Cecilia couldn't hold back tears as she saw the 5 babies, dressed in white, being passed from arm to arm among godparents chosen from those who had truly been there for her in the most difficult moments. It was then that she noticed, in the last pew, a figure she hadn't seen since that night almost 2 years ago. Luke, the pilot friend, recently returned from years of working abroad. Their eyes met briefly, and something indescribable passed between them. Not romance, not passion, but a connection that transcended simple definitions. The reunion after the ceremony was filled with unsaid emotions. Luke looked at the babies with genuine admiration, and at Cecilia with a respect that bordered on reverence. "You did the impossible," he said simply. His words were free of any condescension or pity, just a sincere recognition of her strength. Later, when everyone had left, and she was rocking the babies to sleep, she found an envelope he had left behind. Inside, a generous check and a card with only one phrase: "For whatever you need, no questions asked, no expectations." That night, after all the children had finally fallen asleep, Cecilia allowed herself to cry. Not from despair, not from self-pity, but from the deep relief of knowing that she wasn't completely alone in the battle she still had ahead. That there were people willing to support her without judging, to accompany her without asking for anything in return. Sitting on the small porch of her temporary house, watching the stars that dotted the small-town sky, Cecilia realized she had survived what many would consider impossible. She had not only survived, but found a new version of herself in the process. A woman who was stronger, more resilient, more aware of her own power. The quintuplets were sleeping peacefully in their lined-up cribs, their breaths synchronized like a soft melody of hope. They were living proof that sometimes the greatest challenges bring with them the most extraordinary gifts, that the impossible, when faced with courage and support, can transform into a new path, difficult, unpredictable, but surprisingly beautiful in its complexity. "We survived," Cecilia whispered to the starry sky. "And tomorrow, we will survive again." And for the first time in a long time, this was not just a desperate statement of determination, but a serene acknowledgement of a truth she now recognized in her heart. They were surviving. And at some point, without her even realizing exactly when, this daily survival had begun to transform into a peculiar, challenging, but undeniably authentic form of prosperity. In the months that followed the christening, Luke gradually became a constant presence in the life of the unusual family. At first, his visits were brief and irregular, limited by the intervals between international flights that made up his routine as a pilot. He always arrived with fascinating stories of distant places, which he told with a twinkle in his eye that captivated not only the baby's attention, but also reignited in Cecilia a curiosity about the world that she had forgotten she possessed. When the quintuplets turned 1, Luke managed to get a transfer to a domestic route that allowed him to return to the small town more often. I got tired of seeing the whole world without having a place to come back to, he explained simply, when Cecilia asked about the change. With each visit, he brought small mementos from distant places. Not expensive toys or ostentatious gifts, but meaningful objects that told stories. A small stone from the Great Wall of China, sand from the Sahara Desert, kept in a colorful little jar, a rare bird feather found in a tropical forest. For the children, he built a world map on the wall, where he marked the places he brought these mementos from with colored pushpins. "The world is much bigger than this town," he would say to the little ones, who didn't yet understand his words, but absorbed his enthusiasm. "And one day, if you want, you can explore every corner of it." With the babies turning 13 months, Cecilia turned her grandmother's old honey cake recipe into a small business. In the makeshift kitchen at the back of the house, she worked during the few hours the children were asleep. The sweet and comforting aroma of caramelized honey with cinnamon became her signature, and soon the first orders for local parties started coming in. "My granddaughter has always had blessed hands for baking," Grandma Teresa boasted to anyone who would listen, inadvertently becoming the best advertisement for the nascent business. The money was little, but it was hers, earned with her own hands, without depending on charity or the scraps that Mark was eventually forced to pay after exhausting legal battles that seemed more designed to emotionally wear her down than to fulfill paternal responsibilities. One of the children, Raphael, the quietest and most observant of the quintuplets, the last to leave the NICU, developed a special fascination with airplanes and the sky. He was always the first to run clumsily to the door when he heard Luke's car arriving, his little eyes lighting up with recognition and pure joy. "Looks like we have a future pilot here," Luke commented one afternoon, watching the little boy who held a meticulously folded paper airplane with adoration. In the months that followed, the little boy showed subtle signs of motor difficulties that worried the local doctors. While his siblings progressed in their developmental milestones, with small variations within what was expected for preemies, Raphael seemed to struggle to master basic coordination skills. It might just be a developmental delay, the pediatricians initially reassured her, common in multiple premature births, especially considering the time he spent in the ICU. But as the children approached their second birthday, it became clear that there was a neurological condition that would require specialized care, resources the small town simply didn't have. On a particularly hot summer afternoon, when the quintuplets were a year and a half old, Cecilia found Luke sitting alone on the backyard swing, watching the rising stars in the gradually darkening sky. The silence between them was comfortable, as it can only be between people who don't feel the need to fill it with empty words. "Why are you doing all of this for us?" she finally asked, verbalizing the question she had been carrying for months. Luke hesitated, looking at his own hands before answering. "When we were teenagers, you helped me in the darkest moment of my life, although you probably don't even remember it." Cecilia frowned, searching her memory. "That end-of-year party in our junior year," he continued. "My dad had died a week before. I was completely lost, sitting alone in the garden, contemplating some terrible choices. You sat down next to me, without saying anything for a long time. Then you offered me half of your sandwich and said, 'I don't know what to say, but I know how to be silent with you.'" Luke's eyes shone with contained emotion as he continued. "You stayed with me for 2 hours, without questions, without empty advice, just present. I promised myself that if I could ever repay you." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. That night, they talked until dawn, sharing pains, interrupted dreams, and hopes that refused to die. They talked about her fear of not being enough for 5 children with such intense needs, about the weight of the guilt she carried for her moment of weakness with him before she discovered the pregnancy, about the exhaustion that accumulated in her bones every day. Luke listened to everything, without judgment, without rushed solutions, just present. When the sun rose, something new was also born between them. Not just attraction or affection, but a deep understanding that transcended words. The cake business grew unexpectedly when one of Cecilia's cakes was served at the mayor's daughter's wedding. The bride, delighted with the unique flavor that blended tradition and innovation, made a point of mentioning the baker's name in her thank you speech. Orders came in numbers that Cecilia couldn't handle alone. Her mother, who had always criticized her decision to leave the capital to bury herself again in this small town, surprised her by showing up one day in an apron, rolling up her sleeves. "Teach me your recipe, daughter." Together, they transformed the abandoned garage into a makeshift bakery. The name they chose, Five Graces, silently honored the children who had inspired everything. The logo, designed by a talented nephew, featured 5 small birds flying in formation. When the babies approached 2.5 years old, the doctor confirmed the diagnosis. Raphael, the quietest and most contemplative, the same one who loved airplanes, had a rare neurological condition that would affect his motor coordination and cognitive development. The necessary treatments were only available in large medical centers, hours away. The news hit Cecilia like a punch to the stomach. Every night, after the children were asleep, she obsessively researched the condition, treatment alternatives, costs, and possibilities. Under the dim light of the lamp, she made endless calculations that never added up, the despair growing like a tide threatening to drown her. Coincidentally, that same week, Luke received a proposal for a supervisory position at a regional airline based in the capital, a position that would mean fewer international flights and more stability. When he shared the news during dinner, he didn't present it as a solution to her problems, but as a possibility. "Could we try this together, if you want?" The proposal hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither of them dared to name fully. That night, in the silent room, Cecilia looked at the 5 little ones sleeping, their noses, their eyelashes, their tiny hands clutching their blankets. She thought about the treatment Raphael needed, the opportunities the capital would offer all the quintuplets, the business she had built from scratch, the parents who now depended on her, the community that had welcomed her when she needed it most. These were considerations that had no simple answers, or decisions without losses. Aurora, always the most perceptive of the quintuplets, seemed to sense her mother's emotional turmoil. During those days of silent contemplation, the little one followed Cecilia like a shadow, offering spontaneous hugs at the most unexpected moments, as if to reassure her that, no matter the decision, she would be by her side. The decision to try a life together didn't come from idealized romance, overwhelming passion, or financial need, but from a partnership born of mutual respect and shared purpose. A slow, solid construction, built on foundations that would withstand future storms. When Luke knelt to propose officially, there was no diamond ring or grandiose gestures, just a small box containing 5 miniature paper airplanes made of silver, one for each child. "I'm not asking to replace anyone in your lives," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Just to have the privilege of watching them grow and helping them fly." She didn't answer with words, but placed her hand over his, their fingers intertwined, symbolizing not just a romantic union, but an alliance to face whatever came next. News of the move to the capital was met with mixed reactions in the small community. Some expressed genuine sadness at the departure of the family they had adopted. Others barely hid their relief at seeing a constant, living reminder that social conventions can be broken and rebuilt in new forms. Grandma Teresa, now nearing 83, but still as firm as the centennial oak in the town square, was the only one who fully understood the need for the change. "Roots are important," she said, while helping to pack the precious family mementos. "But equally important are wings. Some trees need wider land to grow fully." The preparations for the move filled the following weeks. Each object was carefully considered. What to take, what to leave, what to donate. The quintuplets, still too young to fully understand what was happening, absorbed the excitement in the air, running between boxes and filling the house with laughter that felt like bittersweet goodbyes to the walls that had witnessed their first steps. Luke transformed the process into an adventure for the children. Together, they painted a mural in the temporary room filled with clouds, airplanes, and birds. "Where we're going," he explained, "the sky will be the same. Look up when you feel homesick, and remember that under the same sky, we are all connected." On the nights leading up to their departure, while the children were asleep, Cecilia and Luke planned the future in hopeful whispers. The bakery branch in the capital, the special school for Raphael, the logistics of taking care of 5 small children in a big, unknown city. "I'm scared," she confessed one of those nights, her vulnerability escaping like water between her fingers. "What if it doesn't work out? What if it's a mistake?" Luke held her hands in his touch conveying a security that his words alone couldn't. "Then we'll try another path," he answered simply, "together." It was a modest promise, without absolute guarantees or eternal vows. Just the sincere commitment of 2 adults who knew that life rarely follows a predetermined map, but who chose to navigate its complexities side by side. On the eve of their departure, Cecilia visited the local cemetery where her paternal grandfather was buried. She took the quintuplets, who placed wildflowers they had collected along the way on the simple tombstone. "Grandpa would have been proud of you," her mother, who insisted on accompanying them, said. "He always said you had the freest spirit in the family." That last night in the small town, friends and family gathered for an intimate farewell. Under the stars in the backyard, they shared meals, stories, and promises of frequent visits. Grandma Teresa handed Cecilia a worn notebook, its pages yellowed with time. "The family recipes," the elderly woman explained. "7 generations of strong women. Now it's your turn to add yours." When everyone had left, and the house finally fell silent, Cecilia found Luke on the porch, contemplating the starry sky they would soon observe from a different angle, from a different city, from a different life. "Are we doing the right thing?" she asked, not for the first time. Luke didn't answer immediately. His silence wasn't hesitation, but respect for the gravity of the question. "There's no absolute right or wrong in choices like this," he finally said. "There's only what we do with the decisions after we make them." She rested her head on his shoulder, allowing herself, just for that moment, to share the weight she carried. In the room, the quintuplets slept peacefully, oblivious to the adult complexities that would shape their destinies. Clara, with her blue blanket, she refused to give up. The twins, Miguel and Theo, always close even in sleep. Aurora with her favorite book still clutched in her tiny hands. And Raphael, the little dreamer, sleeping with the silver paper airplane Luke had made for him. 5 little lives intertwined by extraordinary circumstances. 5 hearts that beat at different rhythms, but composed a single symphony of love and possibilities. 5 reasons to be brave, to move forward, to believe that even the most unexpected paths can lead to wonderful destinations. Cecilia knew that dawn would bring challenges, uncertainties, and fears, but it would also bring possibilities, hopes, new beginnings, and deep roots that would provide sustenance for wings that were just beginning to unfold. "We're ready," she whispered to the universe, a prayer and a statement simultaneously. And the universe, in its silent wisdom, seemed to respond with the soft glow of the stars. You always have been. Don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. When the quintuplets turned 3, the family prepared to move to the capital. The last Sunday in the small town transformed into an impromptu celebration in the central square, where many had silently criticized Cecilia at first, but now said goodbye with genuine regret. The Five Graces Bakery served free cake to the entire community, a symbolic return for all the support received in the darkest moments. Grandma Teresa, now visibly frail with age but still strong in spirit, took her granddaughter's hands in her own, marked by decades of hard work and unconditional love. "Take our recipes, our stories, our strength," she said, her voice choked with emotion, "but come back and tell us yours." Under the centennial tree, where generations of the family had gathered at decisive moments, the quintuplets ran and played, oblivious to the silent tears exchanged among the adults. Raphael, with his motor limitations, watched his siblings from his grandfather's lap, his eyes shining with an intelligence that compensated for his physical difficulties. Suddenly, the little boy pointed to a bird flying high in the Sunday blue sky. "Are we going to fly too, Mommy?" he asked, with his still hesitant voice, full of hope. Cecilia swallowed the lump in her throat before answering. "Yes, my love, all of us." The adaptation to the capital was more difficult than they had anticipated. The apartment, although bigger than the house in the small town, seemed to confine the children who were used to backyards and quiet streets where everyone knew them by name. The neighbors complained about the inevitable noise that 5 small children made, even when Cecilia and Luke tried to keep them quiet. The daily traffic was exhausting, turning simple tasks, like taking Raphael to therapy, into near impossible missions. Establishing the bakery branch consumed all of Cecilia's savings, and a significant part of Luke's. The rent for the commercial space was 3 times what it had been in the small town, and the suppliers were less flexible, demanding upfront payments from a businesswoman with no history in the capital. During the first month, Cecilia cried silently in the bathroom every night, questioning if she had made the right decision. Luke, now working long hours in his new airline position, noticed her silent suffering. Instead of offering immediate solutions or trying to minimize the problems, he just listened, truly listened, to her worries, fears, and regrets. "We can go back if that's what you really want," he said one night, holding her hands with tenderness. "There's no shame in admitting that a path didn't work out." But Cecilia knew it wasn't that simple. Returning would mean giving up specialized treatment for Raphael, educational opportunities for all the quintuplets, and the chance to expand the business she had built with so much effort. "We need to try a little longer," she replied, finding a determination she didn't know she still possessed. For them, the specialized treatment for Raphael proved to be both hopeful and heartbreaking. The multidisciplinary team at the Children's Rehabilitation Center, a neurologist, a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, a speech therapist, created an intensive plan that would require years of consistent intervention. "He has extraordinary potential," the neurologist explained after weeks of evaluation. "His cognitive development is above average, which is remarkable, considering the circumstances of his premature birth. The challenge is in his motor coordination and sensory processing." In the waiting rooms of the doctor's offices, Cecilia met other mothers of children with similar challenges. Slowly, she formed a new support network, different from the one in the small town, but equally vital. There was Mariana, a lawyer and mother of autistic twins. Julia, a university professor, raising a daughter with a rare syndrome, all alone. Carlos, a single father of a boy with cerebral palsy. Among these families, there was no need for explanations or apologies. A look, a tired sigh, a knowing smile. Silent codes of those who lived parallel realities, incomprehensible to most. One of these new friendships changed the course of Rafael's life. Elisa, a retired music teacher and mother of a young woman with the same neurological condition, offered to give free lessons to the quintuplets. "Music was what allowed my daughter to find her voice," she explained. "When her fingers couldn't manipulate common objects, we discovered she could play piano keys with surprising precision." In the first session, they made a discovery. Rafael, with his significant motor limitations for everyday tasks, showed a natural talent for rhythms and melodies that transcended his physical difficulties. His fingers, which struggled to hold a spoon, glided with impressive fluency across the keys of the small keyboard Elisa had brought. "It's as if music unlocks something inside him," Luke commented, moved as he witnessed the first lesson. "As if his body knows exactly what to do when guided by melody." The bakery in the capital initially attracted few customers. The sophisticated local residents didn't seem to appreciate the simple and authentic flavors that had been so successful in the small town. For weeks, Cecilia returned home with almost whole cakes, her discouragement growing each day. Exhausted and disheartened one night, after another day of low sales, she tried something new. She incorporated urban ingredients like matcha, exotic fruits, and international spices into her grandmother's traditional recipes. The result was a surprising fusion that began to attract the cosmopolitan palates of the capital. "It's like our family," Aurora, the most philosophical of the quintuplets, commented after tasting a honey and lavender cupcake. "Different, but still ours." On the quintuplets' first day of kindergarten, Cecilia stayed in the car for an hour after dropping them off, unable to pull away, watching through the window as they interacted with other children. 4 of them adapted quickly, but Rafael remained isolated in the corner of the playground, visibly intimidated by the noisy and unpredictable environment. Just as she was about to go in and rescue him, she saw something extraordinary. One by one, his siblings abandoned their new games and formed a protective circle around him, inviting other children to an activity he could participate in. Clara led with surprising authority for her 3 years. Miguel and Theo served as attentive guards. Aurora, with her keen sensitivity, translated her brother's needs to the other children. In that moment, Cecilia realized they had a bond that transcended any difficulty. They weren't just siblings. They were a unified force, a constellation where each star shone in a unique way but belonged unequivocally to the same sky. 6 months after the move to the capital, when the quintuplets were 3.5, Cecilia and Luke decided to make their union official. The wedding took place in an intimate ceremony at the Botanical Garden, with the quintuplets as the main characters alongside the bride and groom. Luke prepared special vows, not only for Cecilia, but for each of the children, promising them individually respect, support, and unconditional love. For Clara, he promised to honor her natural leadership and teach her to use it wisely. For Miguel and Theo, he committed to celebrating their differences, despite their identical appearances. For Aurora, he swore to nurture her sensitivity as a strength, not a weakness. And for Rafael, he promised to be an example of how to overcome limitations and find alternative paths to dreams. During the exchange of rings, Aurora interrupted them spontaneously. "Now are we a real family?" The innocent question silenced everyone present, crystallizing the moment into an emotional perfection that no amount of planning could create. "We always have been, darling," Cecilia replied, tears streaming freely. "We just made it official today." News of Mark and Sophia occasionally came through mutual acquaintances or the endless legal proceedings. Their relationship seemed to gradually deteriorate after frustrated attempts to have children of their own. Sources close to them reported that he had started drinking excessively after a series of failed investments, showing the first signs of health problems that would eventually turn serious. Sophia, after years of failed fertility treatments, decided to end the relationship, moving abroad in search of a new beginning. When this news reached her, Cecilia didn't feel the vengeful satisfaction she had imagined, only a melancholic sadness for the waste of potential and dreams. "I never thought I'd say this," she confessed to Luke one night, "but I feel sorry for them." "Compassion doesn't mean forgiveness," he replied. "It means recognizing humanity, even in those who have hurt us." During the first year in the capital, the bakery gradually gained a loyal clientele, and Luke received his first promotion at the airline. Their finances began to stabilize, allowing them to expand Raphael's treatment to include advanced music therapy, which was producing impressive results. Life found a new rhythm, challenging but gratifying. The quintuplets developed increasingly distinct personalities. Clara, the natural leader; Miguel and Theo, the inseparable inventors; Aurora, the sensitive artist; Raphael, the contemplative musician. On quiet nights, when everyone was asleep, Cecilia was still haunted by the secret she carried. The possibility that Raphael wasn't Mark's biological son, but Luke's. She obsessively observed every gesture, every expression, every personality trait, looking for signs. The boy's affinity with Luke, his love for airplanes, his musical inclination similar to the pilot's, were they coincidences or clues? The growing guilt was corroding moments that should have been nothing but joyful. During one of Raphael's therapy sessions, as she watched her son playing the piano with an intense concentration that contrasted with his usual difficulty focusing, Cecilia almost confided her suspicions to the therapist. "Something else is bothering you," the sharp professional observed, noticing her distant gaze. "Something beyond the typical worries about his development." Cecilia hesitated, the unsaid words weighing on her chest. "I'm afraid," she began. Then she stopped. "I'm afraid I'm not being completely honest with the people I love." That night, after putting the children to sleep, she sat with Luke on the apartment's balcony. The city twinkled below them, thousands of lights representing thousands of lives, each with its own secrets, fears, and hopes. "I need to tell you something," she finally said, her voice trembling. "Something I've been carrying for a long time." Luke looked at her with that calm that always anchored her, even in the most violent storms. "About Raphael?" he asked softly. The shock on her face must have been evident as he continued. "I've watched how you look at him, then at me, how you seem worried when someone mentions our similarities." "You knew?" "I suspected," he replied. "The dates coincide, and there's something about him, a certain way of looking at the world, that reminds me so much of myself as a child." The silence that followed wasn't heavy, but expectant, like a musical pause before the final movement of a symphony. "It doesn't change anything for me, Cecilia," Luke continued. "I love all of them equally, but I understand that for you, for him, maybe for everyone in the future, the truth might be important." Silent tears streamed down her face, not from sadness or fear, but from the deep relief of finally sharing the weight she had carried alone for so long. "And if we confirm, and he really is your biological son?" she asked. "How would that affect the others? How would we explain it?" "With the truth, to the extent that they can understand," Luke replied. "Families come in infinite forms. Ours is already extraordinary in so many ways. This would just be one more." That night, They didn't make a definitive decision about a DNA test or revelations. They just acknowledged the possibility together, taking it from the shadows of the unsaid and bringing it into the light of honest communication. Ironically, it was in the same week that they received the news. Mark had been hospitalized with severe liver complications, a consequence of years of excessive alcohol consumption. The doctors were not optimistic about the prognosis. Life, in its incomprehensible complexity, seemed to be determining the timing of revelations and reconciliations. The past and the future were converging at an inevitable crossroads. On a Sunday morning, while the quintuplets played in the park near the apartment, Cecilia watched Raphael trying to keep up with his siblings, his determination evident despite his physical limitations. Luke approached silently, following her gaze. "He has your perseverance," he commented, handing her a coffee. "And your eyes," she replied softly, "and his love for the sky." In that crystalline moment, under the same infinite sky that covered both the capital and the small town they had left behind, Cecilia understood that some truths needed to be faced not out of an abstract moral obligation, but for the practical and emotional well-being of those they loved. "I think it's time," she said simply. Luke nodded, perfectly understanding the meaning of those words. There was no need for elaboration between two people who had learned to read each other's silences and half-sentences. "I'll be by your side," he promised, "regardless of the result, regardless of the consequences." It was a simple promise, but it contained the entire universe of possibilities and challenges that awaited them. A universe they would face not as isolated individuals, but as a family constellation forged not by blood or conventions, but by daily choices of love and commitment. Now here's the biggest question. Is it possible for a family forged by choice to be stronger than one built by blood? And what do you think would happen if one of the quintuplets found out the truth later in life? What would you do in their shoes? Share your thoughts. The following months saw constant growth in both their family and professional lives. The Five Graces Bakery stabilized financially, allowing for the hiring of 2 employees and the development of plans for a future expansion. Luke gained recognition at the airline, gradually taking on more administrative responsibilities that reduced his travels, giving him more time with the family he had chosen. The quintuplets flourished in their new school, developing increasingly distinct personalities and interests. Clara, always the natural leader, was already organizing small plays in the backyard, assigning roles to her siblings with surprising authority for her 4 years. Miguel and Theo, inseparable, built complex structures with building blocks, communicating through that particular language that only twins seem to understand. Aurora, sensitive and observant, spent hours drawing imaginary worlds populated by fantastic creatures, inspired by stories that Grandma Teresa told during their weekly video calls. Raphael, with his neurological condition, made significant progress with consistent therapy, surpassing initial medical expectations, especially in the musical field. His small hands, which struggled to hold cutlery or button clothes, moved with surprising precision over the keys of the piano Luke had bought at an antique auction. The decision about the DNA test that would confirm biological paternity became a delicate process of ethical, emotional, and practical considerations. After consultations with child psychologists specializing in complex family issues, Cecilia and Luke chose to perform the procedure discreetly, keeping the results to share with the children only when they were emotionally prepared to understand the nuances of the situation. What matters is that they are loved unconditionally, the psychologist affirmed during one of the guidance sessions. Regardless of the results, the truth must serve their emotional well-being, not abstract concepts of transparency. When the quintuplets turned 5, They celebrated with an elaborate party at home, bringing together school friends, neighbors, and colleagues who had become like family in the capital. Grandma Teresa, despite her advanced age, insisted on making the trip to be present, bringing 5 small protective amulets she had made by hand, a family tradition passed down through generations. To guard your dreams and chase away your nightmares, she explained to her great-grandchildren as she handed them the colorful bags, filled with aromatic herbs and small crystals. A few days later, Luke was promoted to Director of Operations at the airline, a position that brought not only financial stability, but recognition for years of dedicated work. To celebrate, they planned a special day at the city's Central Park the following Sunday. The Central Park was shining on that spring Sunday. Newly bloomed flowers colored the flower beds. Children laughed, running through the lawns. Elderly couples walked slowly, hand in hand, along the tree-lined paths. The quintuplets scattered across the playground, some on the swings, others on the slide. Raphael happily played an improvised drum, showing the progress he had made after years of therapy. Cecilia watched them, sitting on a bench, the sun warming her face, finally allowing herself to relax after an exhausting week of expanding the bakery to its second branch. Luke walked away for a moment to buy ice cream, promising to bring everyone's favorite flavor. It was a small ritual that had become a family tradition on Sundays. It was in this brief interval of tranquility that her eyes caught a familiar figure on the other side of the park. A man with a haggard appearance, his clothes still expensive, but showing signs of wear, was staring fixedly at the children. His skin had a yellowish tone, and his body seemed thinner than normal, evident signs of advanced liver disease. Cecilia's heart ached as she recognized Mark, visibly aged beyond his years, his bloodshot eyes betraying the relentless progress of the disease. For an endless moment, she remained paralyzed on the bench, thousands of emotions crossing her like an electric current. Resentment for the years of abandonment, pity for his current state, fear of the imminent confrontation, anxiety about the children discovering the truth before the right time. The sounds of the park seemed to disappear, replaced by the roar of blood in her ears. When she finally managed to move, it was too late. Mark was walking slowly toward the children, his gaze fixed on Raphael, who remained absorbed in his musical improvisation, oblivious to the drama unfolding. "It's them, isn't it?" The ex-husband's voice sounded strangely fragile, devoid of the arrogance that had once characterized him. Up close, Cecilia noticed the deep wrinkles around his eyes, the subtle tremor in his hands, the general appearance of a man who had lost much more than material possessions. "They're big and healthy." The words came out haltingly, as if each one cost physical effort. The children momentarily stopped their games, watching with childish curiosity this strange man who was talking to their mother, completely unaware of the emotional whirlwind unfolding. "What do you want?" Her voice came out firmer than she expected. Years of pain crystallized into 4 simple words. Mark looked down at his own shoes, once impeccable, now visibly worn. "I lost everything," he confessed in a near whisper. "The company, the house, even Sophia." He made a vague gesture with his hand. "But none of that matters compared to what I abandoned here." He looked at the children again, who had resumed their games, and unshed tears glistened in his eyes. "I just wanted to see them once, to know if they're okay." Luke returned at that moment, balancing 5 colorful ice creams. He immediately sensed the tension in the scene, recognizing the ex-husband from the legal documents. With surprising calm, he distributed the ice creams to the children before approaching, positioning himself not aggressively, but protectively next to his family. The contrast between the 2 men couldn't have been more evident. One built, the other destroyed. One took responsibility, the other ran from it. One aged with dignity, the other with regrets. "I know," Mark said suddenly, looking directly at Luke. "I know who you are. I've always known. You two met before all this happened, didn't you?" The world seemed to freeze in that instant. The children, sensing the atmospheric shift, instinctively moved closer to their parents, unconsciously forming the family portrait they were. Raphael, always the most intuitive, despite his limitations, grabbed onto Luke's leg with a naturalness that only genuine love can produce, looking with curiosity at the stranger who was making his mother so uncomfortable. Yes, the confession escaped Cecilia's lips almost involuntarily, freeing the secret she had held for so many years. "We met once, weeks before I found out I was pregnant, weeks before I found out about you and Sophia." The words hung in the air like birds of prey. "There's a possibility that one of them—" She couldn't complete the sentence, but it wasn't necessary. The three adults looked at the children simultaneously, each one processing the implications of this revelation in deeply personal ways. Mark ran his hand over his face, as if trying to erase years of mistakes with a single gesture. "I deserve this," he finally said, "but they don't deserve to grow up without knowing the truth." The ice cream slowly melted in the children's hands, colorful drips marking the ground like rainbow tears. Clara, always the most perceptive, watched the three adults intensely, understanding more than any of them imagined. "Who is that man?" she finally asked, her childish voice cutting through the tension like a ray of light in a dark room. "Why is Mommy crying?" The moment of truth had arrived earlier than planned, in a public setting that none of them would have chosen. But perhaps, Cecilia reflected, there was no perfect time or place for complex truths. "This is Mark," she explained, kneeling to be at the children's eye level. He is part of the story of how you came into the world." The explanations that followed were simplified, appropriate for a child's understanding, but fundamentally honest. There were no mentions of resentment or blame, just basic facts about relationships that change, families that transform, and adults who make mistakes and try to fix them. Mark, visibly moved, kept a respectful distance, while Cecilia and Luke led the conversation with the quintuplets. When he was finally invited to come closer, he knelt with difficulty, his body, weakened by the disease, protesting the movement. "You are very special," he said simply, "and you have wonderful parents." The meeting in the park was brief, but catalyzed profound changes. In the following days, Mark formalized adjustments to his will, ensuring financial support for the quintuplets' specialized education, and renouncing any right to interfere with Cecilia and Luke's parental decisions. His gesture, although late, represented a sincere recognition of his errors and a genuine desire to contribute positively, even from a distance. The result of the DNA test arrived 2 weeks later in a discreet envelope. Cecilia, Luke, and Mark, temporarily released from the hospital for the occasion, gathered in the living room. The children purposefully absent, sent on a special day trip to the zoo with school friends. The envelope remained sealed on the table for long minutes. No one had the courage to break the seal that separated the constructed past from the uncertain future. "I have something to say first," Mark intervened, visibly weakened by the disease. "Regardless of what that paper says, I would like to make a request, that you allow me to get to know these children, not as a father, but as someone who deeply regrets their actions and wishes in the time I have left, to offer some kind of positive presence in their lives." When they finally opened the envelope, the revelation confirmed what many had already suspected. Raphael, the little musician with a passion for airplanes, carried Luke's DNA. Science had finally validated the special connection that had always existed between them, transcending rational explanations. Silent tears streamed down Luke's face, while a sad smile formed on Mark's lips. Cecilia watched the two men who had defined such different paths in her life, now united by a revelation that redefined the meaning of fatherhood and family. In the following months, Mark became a discreet but constant presence, visiting when his health allowed, always respecting the boundaries set by Cecilia and Luke. He never introduced himself as a father, but as a friend who genuinely appreciated the privilege of witnessing the growth of those 5 extraordinary lives. A year after the meeting in the park, the bakery expanded to its 3rd location, now incorporating a cooking school for children with special needs, a project inspired by Raphael's journey. The inauguration became a media event, drawing attention to the cause of inclusion. From 5 small miracles, Cecilia explained in a heartfelt interview, we learned that limitations are just invitations to creativity. The business that was born from a desperate need for survival transformed into a significant social movement, proving that purpose is often hidden in the most painful adversities. Grandma Teresa's traditional recipes, now adapted for special diets, connected different generations and cultures, building bridges between past and future, tradition and innovation. The night they received the news of Mark's passing, the family gathered in the garden for a symbolic ritual. Each child planted a different tree, representing the diverse paths they would follow in life, but with roots intertwined in the same soil. Luke, now the legal father of all 5, shared stories about the constellations visible in the night sky. Some stars have already burned out a long time ago, he explained gently, but their light continues to travel through the universe, touching distant lives. Raphael, whose motor coordination had improved significantly thanks to consistent therapy and musical practice, pointed to a particular set of stars. Those 5 form a family, just like us, he observed, with a wisdom that transcended his 6 years. Yes, Luke agreed, and like all constellations, each star shines with its own light, but together they tell a unique story. Cecilia looked at this improvised, mended, imperfect, and absolutely extraordinary family they had built together, and she finally felt the weight of the past transform into a solid foundation for the future. Like the stars above, some pains never completely disappeared, but with time and the right perspective, they transformed into points of light that helped others find their way in the darkness. That night, as the 5 newly planted trees began their journeys of silent growth, Cecilia understood that life rarely follows linear or predictable paths, that sometimes it is precisely in the unexpected detours, in the painful falls, in the reluctant new beginnings, that we find our true north. The message she would share with her children throughout the years, and that she now shared through her bakery and social projects with other families facing adversity, was simple yet profound. It is not the circumstances of birth that define a family, but the daily choices of love, respect, and dedication. The 5 trees would grow at different rates, some taller, others more leafy, each with unique characteristics. But their roots, invisible to the eye, but fundamental to their existence, would remain intertwined, nourishing each other, creating a support system that transcended physical space and chronological time. We are a complete constellation now, Aurora whispered, her sensitivity perfectly capturing the moment. And it was true. Each of them, Cecilia, Luke, Clara, Miguel, Theo, Aurora, and Raphael, represented a point of light in a sky they had created together, a sky that also embraced the memories of Grandma Teresa, the ephemeral but significant presence of Mark, and all those who, in some way, contributed to this improbable story of love in its multiple manifestations. Under the same starry sky that had witnessed so many beginnings and endings, the family walked back home, not as separate individuals, but as a single constellation, complete in its complexity, perfect in its imperfection, indestructible in its connection.